Hello, everyone. Today, I'm very pleased to be discussing with George Penfold, a former faculty member at Rural Planning and Development that many of you will know. And I know George retired. Retired's not exactly the right word, is it, George? Because you went out to British Columbia with all kinds of other things that you did
Right.
after what, a 12-year career, something of that nature?
Yeah, in total, I was there 14 years. And then I had a 2-year break, 91 to 93, on the Commission on Planning and Development, right, with John Sewell. So,
Yeah.
yeah, 12 years teaching, 2 year sabbatical to do that. And then, yeah, came out here in 95.
We'll certainly hear all about some of those details, especially some of the work you did with the Sewell Commission. I think will be of interest to folks just from the legacy perspective of the school. But I have to, at the outset, acknowledge the role you've played in my career, because as you know, when you left Huron County, you were a planner there. That created my first opportunity. And I, of course, went on to practice with Huron for quite a number of years, 20, 25 years. But then when you left the university, and in fact, when you did the Sewell Commission work, that created my first opportunity in academia. So big thanks to you for allowing me to follow your footsteps kind of over the decades. So
Well, it's a little more complicated than that because you and Deb bought the farm that Maryland
well,
used to live on it here in county. And then
I'm sorry, George, you have gone completely mute. So I'm going to put this on a pause for a second, and we'll pick this up in a second.
Okay,
Oh,
here we
you're
are.
back there, George.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you know what transpired there.
Well, we're in the middle of a storm here right now.
Oh,
So
okay.
electricity and internet may be,
Sketchy.
yeah.
Well, that's life in rural Canada, isn't it?
Well, it's life in BC in October, November for sure.
Well, that's good. So you were just saying, of course, Deb and I bought the farm from you in Maryland, and our paths crossed in that way as well, which is pretty cool.
Yes, indeed.
Indeed. So if I could,
I've been looking over my shoulder. You haven't shown up in BC yet.
if I could, I'll take you back to the early days of the school, and of course, you were working as a planner in Huron County, and good things happened after that. You were off to Guelph. So just tell us a little bit about your background and how it led to you being at Guelph in the first instance.
Well, it actually started a bit before the school did, because I went back to do my graduate work in the Center for Resource Development, Stephen Rod, in 78. And at that point in time, the initial discussions about the school were underway. So Tony and Stephen, other folks were involved in the thought process of what would a school of rural planning and development look like. And so in the course of doing my graduate work here, given that I was actually a living, breathing planner, I got called in to some of those meetings to talk about my thoughts on what a curriculum for someone interested in rural planning and development might look like. And so I had, for lack of a better word, investment in the school from that point on. But when I left, I never thought a whole lot more about it. I saw that it was actually in place, followed through the Guelph newsletters that Mark Lapping had been appointed chair. And I'm still not sure what motivated me, but I was called in just to congratulate him on getting the job. And in the course of the conversation, he said, well, are you going to be applying for the position? Which I didn't know about. And so he explained to me they were looking for a practitioner to teach planning methods and to bring some reality into the program, experience of reality, and also people who actually had accreditation with the Planning Institute in order to be able to meet the accreditation qualifications. So I thought, well, why not? I don't have much to lose. I figured at that point that my career path was heading toward being a director of planning and development somewhere other than Huron County, because that was never going to happen as long as Gary was there. Yeah, so I did the interview and ended up getting the position, which I thought would be a 5-year gig. I had seen enough um, faculty telling war stories that I figured their shelf life is 4 to 5 years, and that would be enough for me. Then I would be back to living a real life rather than the retirement. So, yeah, that's how it all played out.
Well, a couple of things that come out of that. First, to acknowledge the role that Gary Davidson played in both of our careers, and the
Yes,
role that he played in the
absolutely.
school. And his name's come up from others on a number of occasions in terms of I mean, the leadership he's provided to the planning profession, right, and how
Yeah,
important it was for the school to tie into that.
yeah, and I think Gary, I have to check with him, but I believe he actually was consulted on the curriculum as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure he was. And the other thing too, and you mentioned the accreditation process, and I think others would acknowledge your important role in helping to get the program accredited by the Planning Institute in the first instance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I became the connection between the school and the Planning Institute, and yeah, that was a comfortable and what's the word I'm looking for? Satisfying role for me, right? To be able to make those links and keep, you know, that leg of the stool of what the school was firmly planted in the profession, and to make sure that that was stable and there was good communication, like you just and all that.
Just as you say that, it's going through my mind. I mean, the whole notion of rural planning and development, right? I can
Right.
only think that when you went to speak to the accreditation folks at the outset, they're probably saying, "Pardon?" I mean, was that part of the response that you got back then?
Yeah, a bit. I mean, there was regional planning that was
Mm,
established that sort of encompassed rural, but yeah, I think there was. I don't. I don't think it was skepticism so much as just a lack of appreciation that there was rural distinct from regional,
mm,
and that um, there was value in looking at rural areas, rural communities as entities on their own without them being encompassed by something larger. So that there could be a specific focus on their interests, their needs, their capacities, their abilities, and so on. And
mm.
yeah, I think that's and well, you're aware that discussion still is ongoing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it's so the purpose of the school, I don't think, in retrospect, was ever to actually resolve that question, but to actually keep the discussion going.
Right. Yeah, and the small town piece that we tend to add, and we
Yeah,
increasingly think about Indigenous communities. I know that was certainly a
right.
focus back then as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And so you sell the farm in Huron County, and you arrive in Guelph to
Yeah,
this
to this
school,
nice
and
young couple.
yeah, and you, yeah, indeed, and you know I don't know if your first office was in Johnson Hall or
Yes, it
McKinnon
was.
or where. So you walk
Yeah,
in and think, oh, what have I done? Like, did that talk go through your mind?
exactly. Exactly, right. But I didn't have time to think about it really because the first year was a whirlwind, right? I was modifying courses, developing courses. I sat in on Mark's planning law course. I sat in on Mark's planning theory course, on John Wool's planning law course. I accompanied Mark on a number of his tours around to various conferences and various meetings to do the big announcement at school and the where to help message and all that sort of thing. So yeah, and then top of that, there was the whole personal reality of moving from a farm and rural to a townhouse condo in the city,
Yeah.
from a career as a planner to teaching in a graduate program when I had absolutely zero experience teaching. So uh, it was emotionally high for sure, but it was also flat out, sort of on the edge of almost panic half the time, first couple of years, right? So just trying to keep up with the momentum that the reality of the new program and Mark's driving it created. It was a
Yeah.
fabulous time, actually.
Yeah, I'm sure the excitement among students was over the roof. I would have to think.
Yeah, it was. Well, for all of us who were involved, I think,
Yeah.
because we all had the feeling that this was a special initiative, and that we were part of something that was and certainly would continue to be bigger than any of us, right? And yeah, it was a thrill.
Hmm.
Yeah, and the surprise for me, pleasant surprise, when I first started, is that I realized the students in the program are my peers,
Hmm.
right? They're not,
Hmm.
at that point, I was in my mid-30s, and there were some, a handful, two or three, that people who had come directly out of undergraduate. Most of the people with experience, some of my age, actually during the course of my tenure there was a John Iver, who I did my undergraduate degree in engineering with, who came through the program. So um, that was something I hadn't thought about when I said yes to the job, is that I would be learning along with a group of peers, right?
Yeah, no, that's very true.
So,
I mean, mirrors my own experience to a degree. When you went off and did work in the School Commission, and I stepped in at that point in time for a couple of years, I realized I'm teaching people. I don't know if even if teaching is the right word. I'm
right.
leading sessions where people are older than I am, and it was
Yeah.
humbling and and a bit intimidating at times too.
Yeah, exactly. Because many of the people had both different experiences in working with communities than I did, and some even a broader range of experiences than I did. And so it took me a while to get used to the fact that um, I'm here to facilitate education,
Hmm.
right, including my own, right. And if there's something I came away with, one of the questions is that you asked is what messages would you have for former students? It would be, man, thanks for teaching me so much,
Yeah.
right? Because every project, every paper, every thesis, it was always as much of a learning experience for me to help students through those processes as I think it was for them.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was an incredible learning experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll continue your career path for a second. So you
Okay.
were at the school doing teaching, immersed in things, and you
Yeah.
may want to speak to something before the School Commission, because I know you're doing things throughout that period of time. But I don't know if you want to jump to the School Commission work that you did, or
Um, well, just one comment before that. One of the things that kept me in the program, because my initial outgoing was 5 years and Seoul was 10 years, right? Um, and it really speaks to the earlier comment about learning, is that one of the things I discovered is that in a faculty member in something like the School of Rural Planning and Development, which is fairly comprehensive, there's a freedom to get involved with whatever your passion and available resources allows you to get involved with. So I got involved in the local health council, which led to a 2-year contract with the Ministry of Community and Social Services on rural childcare. What does an engineer know about rural childcare, other than I had kids, right? But I knew the context of rural, and yeah, I think some of the remnants of that initiative still exist in Wellington County in child resource centers. I had no experience at all with First Nations. One of the conferences that Mark and I attended was First Nations Chiefs Conference up in Thunder Bay. And one of the chiefs of a small band near Cochrane approached me after and talked about the challenges they were having there, trying to find or to deal with, at that point, BC Hydro on the Abitibi Dam, trying to acquire the small community that had originally been built to support the dam that was no longer necessary because of automation. And that led to a 2-year project on reserve, relocating their reserve and establishing a new reserve site for them. Those are two examples. Neither of those things would have been in my frame of reference had I stayed working in municipal planning. And
Hmm.
so those are two significant examples of opportunities that I had there that I would never have dreamed of going into the academic life,
Hmm.
which then led to the phone call at about 7 o'clock at night from the minister saying, "Do you have any idea why I'm calling?" No, I get calls all the time from cabinet members checking the weather. What? No, I had no clue, and so that was when the proposition was laid out to me that I was interested in joining the Soil Commission, which was, yeah, one of those moments in your life when something totally unexpected and well beyond anything you could ever imagine in terms of a new opportunity lands in your lap, and all you have to do is say yes. So yeah, that was quite a moment.
Yeah.
I told him I didn't say yes right away. I said I'll get back to you on that.
I'm thinking, I find increasingly students, of course, haven't heard of the Sewell Commission because it was,
Right.
I hate to think how long ago it was now, maybe just a little snippet of what it was and what it meant for the school too.
Sure. So the Soil Commission was basically a review of the planning act as it existed at that point. There was a 2-year province-wide initiative. John Sewell, former mayor of Toronto at that point, was chair of the commission. It was myself and Toby Vigod. Toby was involved in Ministry of Environment. And so the idea of my being there was that the province at that point, the Bob Rae government, wanted to bring a rural focus into the question of what changes should be made to the Planning Act. So for me, that felt like an incredible opportunity because the idea that I would have the ability, working with John and Toby, to bring that perspective into the discussions on what changes should be made was, yeah, it was a little overwhelming to start. And the idea of working with John Sewell, who was this pretty much international figure at the time, right? Yeah, it was fun, actually.
Yeah. I don't know how much of that material is available online, but any current students or other students of, I mean, more generally speaking, the students of planning have a chance to go back and look at some of the material. It was, I think some of it was quite groundbreaking and very comprehensive and well thought out and great consultation that went on as part of it all.
Yeah, it was, well, first of all, there should be a pretty complete set in the library of Guelph because I managed to snag most of the library that we had collected over 2 years and bring it back, including all of our documents as well as other material that we had collected. Yeah, it was groundbreaking enough that when we met with Bob Rae after completing it, John basically said it's good to go, and which sort of set Bob back a little bit. And he said, "Well, I need to do some checking on this." And then, sure enough, about 3 months later, he came back and said, "Well, you've covered all your bases on this," because he checked with the Urban Development Institute and the environmental groups and so on, and they were all pretty well on board with it, which led to legislative changes that lasted, I don't know, less than a year until Mike Harris came in, and then he passed a new bill and basically threw it all back up again. So we had a small window of success.
Yeah, I would actually personally say it's more than a small window of success because I think many of the concepts and thought processes found their ways into practice beyond the legislative side of things. That planners absorbed that content and worked with I remember the guidelines, which were big at the time from the government. But I think that's influenced practice in ways beyond the legislative side of things.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that not only from the Soil Commission, but then subsequently my experience out here consulting has led me to is that, in fact, uh, planning, if I were to give a message to students at this point in time, I would say, you need to think of yourself as educators.
Mm.
The documentation, the strategies, the plans, whatever they are, they're products along the way. But, I found with consulting, oftentimes I get accused of, well, you wrote this report and it ended up on the shelf. And I realized, well, that's true. But then it wasn't my responsibility to implement it, right? Which led me to be a little more critical in my thinking about what planning is about, right? And what a role of a planner is. And I know for a while there in the profession, there was sort of a trend toward thinking of planning as facilitation, right? And the public, the job was to draw out of the public their wishes for a better future, to document those. And certainly that's part of it, but there's also a critical thinking piece that I think planners need to be responsible for as well, because community members may have a lot of good ideas, but they don't have context to put them in, and they don't have the ability necessarily to understand the demands that those ideas will place on budgets, on organizations, on capacities. And so to me, there's an obligation that I don't think I would have articulated the same way when I was actually in school. That is, as planners, we have an obligation to provide that critical thinking piece and to challenge communities and community members on the ideas, to make sure that they understand where they tie into the community's abilities, the community's capacities, the resources that are available, all those things that would allow those ideas to actually mature and become real. Because I've seen, and you've seen too, a lot of great strategies with a lot of ideas in them that when you look at them, you say, those will never become real because there's just not the ability, the capacity, the context to deliver them in. And so that was something that we spent a lot of time with. Circle back to Soil Commission. That was something that we spent a lot of time with. John inherently understood that. And so we spent a lot of time with organizations, both gaining the political will behind the recommendations from various points in the spectrum of those involved in planning development, but also to make sure that in fact they would work. Because they're I mean, John was a pragmatist, and I leaned that way too, and I could see no value in putting recommendations forward that were too far out of reach for people to grasp and run.
It's interesting for me to reflect, and I know you're question about your personal skill set and so on. I also think of it as a validation of what was occurring at the school. I don't know if you'd agree with me on that, George. Just confirming the audio okay there? You can hear me okay?
Yeah, you just came back. Okay.
Well, that's great. I was just saying about it being also a validation of what was happening at the school, the focus on rural and the thought processes, the diverse views of what planning is. I don't know if you'd comment on that, and maybe as part of that too, it's this reflection, over time, what rural planning and development has meant, more generally speaking, the program to society, to individuals, to communities, and so on.
Yeah, that's harder for me to comment on because once I moved away from the school, I only saw a little bit of what was going on through the students that actually lived and worked in BC. And so I did have the opportunity to actually be hired to do contract by former students a couple of times, which was fun. Thank you, Stephen and Kim. And also worked with Dave Pennell quite a bit, actually co-consulting with him on a couple of projects, including First Nations project. Um, but in tracking from a distance, it's clear that many of the students have ended up in positions where they've had an ability to influence policies, programs, what goes on in communities. And that to me was the sort of highest and best hope for putting people through the program, that they would end up both understanding rural and the specific challenges of rural communities and hopefully some insight on how to address them. But then because of that education, end up in positions where they could actually use that knowledge and skill and their ability to benefit rural communities. And I think by and large that has happened. I don't know the extent to which that's actually been tracked and analyzed by anybody at the school, but that's my impression.
Mm-hmm. And I think and I'll just, I'm not sure if it was mentioned as yet, but you're now based in British Columbia, so you have that perspective and things. And if we look forward to the next 40 years, what do you think some of the challenges might be, or the issues that planning might need to face, again, with that rural lens brought to it?
Man. Well, having just gone through a summer of incredible forest fires here, and more recently, a weather bomb that just south of us dropped about 12 to 14 inches of rain and hurricane force winds. I can't help but think that one of the biggest issues, not just for rural areas, but really, is climate change. I think it impacts rural areas significantly because of timber resources, agricultural resources, water resources, all of those things that climate change is going to have an incredible impact on. And we're already seeing in some areas, like the area that I live in right now, the Comox Valley, a pretty significant migration of people out of urban centers to rural areas, amenity migration, right, using the current terminology. So there are areas that are for various reasons, feeling the impact of that, rural communities that are feeling the impact of that. So that to me is a big one. Another one, and I think it's true in Ontario as it is in BC, is that there's increasingly a disconnect between the political values in rural areas and the political values in urban areas. So most of rural BC is red, most of urban BC is orange or well, the color scheme is actually different out there because red is liberal out there. It's actually conservative, right? Very conservative. So most rural areas of BC vote consistently very right wing, and most of the urban areas vote center left. Yeah. And so that political disparity concerns me, right, in the sense that the political power is increasingly moving to urban areas, and the increasing lack of ability seemingly to communicate across the political spectrum, other than in harsh words and invectives, doesn't bode well from my point of view.
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful comment, George, because we see it across the country, right, that and even more so perhaps in the US, where these pockets of political values are intransigent. It's just people are just stuck in them, right?
On all sides.
Yeah, on all
sides.
Yeah,
it's just not far right. I mean, it's across the board, and it's just troubling both from a broader sense of what the heck is going on with our democracy, but it's particularly troubling for rural areas because they are increasingly being portrayed as the fringe of all of this, and doesn't bode well.
Yeah, no, we see it in climate change in the debate, and I'm saying it's part of the debate around climate change, and and of course seeing it with COVID to a degree, less in this country perhaps, but
so when you see the big social issues, even I mean, we just gone through a whole process here in BC that then spread across Canada about the residential schools, right? And we could pick up the differences in the media and local editorials and everything else between how that was viewed in the urban center, how that was viewed in the resource communities. Just had a recent Supreme Court decision out here on in northern BC, the blueberry band. Supreme Court essentially sending a signal that, hey, you in to the province of BC in your process of land development and resource extraction here, you have not done what you're supposed to be doing with respect to the rights of First Nations. And so there's a lot of dissonance. There's going to be in BC especially a lot of change because of First Nations rights that I don't think we've really fully understood or come to terms with yet. And I expect that what happens in BC is going to, like the residential school thing, is going to set a wave of that kind of rethinking and policy making across the province and across country.
You partially answered this in terms of talking about education and the like, and the role of planners as educators. But anything else you would suggest that you would say to incoming students?
I guess the main thing is keep your curiosity.
Yeah.
Right. Never be satisfied that you absolutely know things, and you know that's me. Maybe too much so. That was one of the challenges when I was teaching. Is I was always being pressured to write a book, and I thought I don't think I'm actually certain that I know enough with enough certainty to fill a book. I could do 50 or 60 pages, and then my self-assurance ran out, my ideas ran out, or something ran out. Yeah, writing a whole book, I just felt like an insurmountable challenge to me because it's just the world is changing so fast, and what you think you know, last year turns out not to be actually as valuable this year. And sometimes it's about that amount of time. So yeah, continue to learn. Yeah. I think that as any job of an educator, and particularly planner as an educator, is to continue to learn. If you're going to play that role of facilitating community, providing critical thinking for community, critical analysis, you have to continue to learn. And so this degree is a critical step on that process. But it's only a step.
As we move towards wrapping up our discussion, perhaps I'm sure students will want to hear a little bit about what you're doing now. As mentioned earlier, you're in British Columbia, and would you say?
I'm in British Columbia, yeah. So I came out here in 1995. Started a consulting career because there just didn't seem to be any other job available that interested me, and I had an offer laid on the table on my first trip out here to do that with Western Resource Group, which was one of the, from my perspective anyway, one of the better consulting companies in the province. Worked closely with them for 5 years and then went out on my own by mutual agreement. And again, got involved in projects, doing things that I had never done before. So did, socioeconomic analysis on a cross-provincial pipeline. I'd never done that before, so I had to learn how to do that while I was doing it. Ended up teaching courses at North Island College on it. So I did that for 10 years, and about a year in, I said to Marilyn, I can see 10 years of this, and I'll be done, right? Because it's working on your own, always worrying about when the next contract is going to come along, it's going to be enough to pay the bills, blah, blah, blah. Is pretty mentally exhausting, even though the work was a ton of fun. Yeah. And sure enough, 10 years later, I was working on a huge Excel spreadsheet, which is not at all close to the most favorite things to do on my list. And the phone rang, and it was a consultant from the Kootenays saying, we're starting this new initiative, a chair in rural economic development at Selkirk College. Would you be interested in applying? So that was the last 5 years of my 9-to-5 career
Mm.
as sitting in an endowed chair in rural economic development in the Kootenays, which was that's a whole other
Yeah.
conversation. That was an incredible experience. And then I came back here, continued to do odd consulting jobs for the next 3 or 4 years. One of the most significant of which was doing
So we've lost your volume, George, just the last moment or so. You were saying about consulting jobs, one of the most significant. Let's see if there's anything you can, and to acknowledge that George has been experiencing some stormy conditions out there while we've been talking. So,
okay, here we go. So where did you lose me?
I think you were saying about a consulting job. One of the most significant was, and then we didn't get to the punchline.
Oh yeah, it was pulling together. It was a bit of literature review, but also some community consultation, socioeconomic impact of the Columbia River Treaty, which involved all of the East and West Kootenays, which I was just talking with a colleague about a month ago. Apparently, is still being used. So, yeah, it's funny to look back. And then since then, so that's 6 years ago now. I'm now 76. Kind of hard to believe it. I've been retired for 6 years, fully.
Okay.
Doing mostly volunteer things around. I live in Strata, so I do volunteer things around here. So on the board, I'm involved in a couple of community organizations. So going to the gym 3 days a week and hiking and camping and enjoying the good retired life, I guess.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. Deb and I had the chance to visit you. Now time flies. That must have been 5 years ago or so, I guess.
Right.
Now you seem very comfortable there in your home and that. So
yeah, yeah.
Anything you'd like to say to former students, George?
No, just hello. It's just yeah, I do feel that I'm out of touch with all those students and just how I guess there's a message to all of them, just how much I appreciated the time that we spent together. You know, it was an incredible experience, as I said, for me to share learning about rural communities with so many well-informed, intelligent, committed people.
Mm-hmm.
It was a rare opportunity, and
It's
something in my career path that I would never have dreamed of. Here I am, a planner. I never planned my career. I just sort of took opportunities that came along, and it ended up far greater than I could have ever imagined if I'd actually sat down when I was 23 graduating saying, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life.
well, it's a privilege,
kind of ironic. Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for the time you spent at Guelph, and I know many students would be saying the same thing. And but thank you for your time today. It's been great to hear your stories and share this collectively with all of us. So thanks so much, and all the best, George.
I do want to say hello to all my former colleagues as well.
Please do.
Yeah.
Well, you did it, but it's interesting as I've been reaching out to people. They've asked me to exchange emails back and forth because it's funny how over time, and this is a lesson for all of us, how over time it is easy to lose the contact with your former colleagues, and how important they were in your life for a period of time. So,
well, it's interesting that we talked about the Soul Commission because two things happened fairly simultaneously. One was I got an email from a guy at Laurentian who is writing a book about John, and so wanted to do a Zoom call with the commission, which led to another Zoom call with the commission for John's 80th birthday. So yeah, it's fun to reconnect after that kind of shared experience. And I must say, both of those, I came away from both of them with a whole new cadre of friends. You know, sometimes you may have experiences of working with people when you leave. You think, well, I'd be okay if I never actually saw that person again in my life. But with both with the commission and the school, I never once had that feeling. It's
Yeah.
just it was just such a gift, I guess, that for no particular reason I received to be able to have the experience, but with Huron County and with school, with school commission, and even out here working with Westland Research Group and as a consultant with people I pulled around me to do consulting with, work with just marvelous people.
Yeah,
Been a good
indeed.
life.
It's about the people, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is.
Well, you take care of yourself, and just a real pleasure to speak to you, George.
Likewise, Wayne.
Take care.
Take care.